Rich Rising, Rich Rising. Welcome to another episode or edition of NEW260, where we are reading a chapter of the New Testament every weekday at 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. There are 260 chapters in the New Testament, and there are 260 weekdays in the year. And so we are waking up every morning, starting with our word, right? And we say a chapter a day keeps us in alignment with God's way. We're not worried about the devil, right? We're worried about staying in alignment with God's way. And so we go to the text every single morning. And of course, I teach you time tithing, where time tithing is giving 90 minutes of your day to your source, whatever you call it, the Most High, dedicating 90 minutes of your waking hours to God. And so we spend about half an hour together here. I also encourage you to take care of your body temple and your mental temple. So your mental temple could be you reading some other book. The book that I'm reading is right here, right here. I'm about to start it. It's called Stillness is the Key. Stillness is the Key. So this is a book that I'm reading. So that's my mental temple. And then we're doing our spiritual temple by reading the Bible. And then physical temple or body temple would be exercising. All right. So let's get into Matthew chapter 14. We just ended 13, where Yeshua was really talking about all of the parables of the kingdom of heaven. And so now we're getting into three big events in Matthew chapter 14. We're talking about the beheading of John. We're talking about the feeding of 5,000, and we're talking about Yeshua walking on water. And we're going to get into what those mean symbolically or metaphysically. All right. So let's get into it. Matthew chapter 14, verse 1. At that time, Herod, the tetrarch, heard of the fame of Jesus, and said unto his servants, This is John the Baptist. He is risen from the dead, and therefore mighty works do show forth themselves in him. Right? So we look at the Hebrew meaning of the names of the people and places because they give us context. They typically give us context about the story. Herod is a common name for Roman leaders, and it means hero, basically. If you just take off the D, it means hero or song of the hero. But in this story, you'll see that Herod actually represents the ego. The ego craves power, and the ego doesn't want to be embarrassed. And so when we look at this from a metaphysical standpoint, which allows us to apply it to our lives, because if this just happens as a historical event, then it really doesn't have that much meaning for us, right? When we can apply it to our lives and how these stories are unfolding and how these characters are characteristics in our own lives happening within us, right? Then it allows us to see patterns and make new choices. So continuing forth, for Herod had laid hold on John and bound him and put him in prison for Herodias' sake, his brother Philip's wife. So Herod went on to marry his brother Philip's wife, which is crazy, right? And then we're going to get into her daughter in just a second. But notice in verse 2, and said unto his servants, This is John the Baptist. He is risen from the dead. But wait a second. John is in jail right now. Why would Herod say that? That's interesting. I don't know if this was a mistake, but why would he say this is John the Baptist risen from the dead when he knows that John the Baptist is in jail, in his own jail, right? So that's just something to consider. Verse 4, for John said unto him, It is not lawful for thee to have her, right? Now, John was using the Judaic laws, right? The Mosaic laws to condemn Herod for taking his brother's wife, right? But you have to remember, Herod was not Jewish. Herod was not Jewish, right? Herod was of the Roman Empire, and those are different sets of laws. But John was condemning and criticizing and judging Herod for taking his brother's wife. In verse 5, and when he would have put him to death, he feared the multitude because they counted him as a prophet. So he knows John the Baptist is in the jail, but then he looks at Yeshua and says, Is this John the Baptist, right? Is this John the Baptist risen from the dead, when he knows he's not dead? So that's just some funny business happening right there, okay? Now, verse 6, when Herod's birthday was kept, the daughter of Herodias danced before them and pleased Herod, right? She used sensuality to please him in this dance, right? And verse 7, whereupon he promised with an oath to give her whatsoever she would ask, right? I think he said in another version, he was willing to give her half of his kingdom, right? In verse 8, and she, being before instructed of her mother, said, give me here John Baptist's head in a charger, a charger plate. So the dance pleased Herod. Herod makes this promise that he would give her whatever she wanted in front of his guests. And because he doesn't want to be embarrassed and he represents the ego, what does he do? He ends up and goes and beheads John and gives it to her on a charger. And her mother wanted John beheaded because John disapproved of their union, right? But again, John represents Judaic law. Herod operates under Roman law. He doesn't operate under Judaic law. Okay. So, verse 9, and the king was sorry, nevertheless, for his oath's sake, and them which sat with him at meat, he commanded it to be given to her. He commanded it to be given to her. So Herod is operating similar to the ego in this particular moment in time, right? Now, John is now beheaded. So what does John really represent? We heard earlier in Matthew that John was great, one of the greatest or the greatest amongst men who were born of a woman. So men who were born of the flesh. John was able to overcome many of the animalistic aspects of the flesh, so much so that people even perceived him as an animal because he lived in nature, right? He wore very scant clothing, and he also ate of insects, right? So John had conquered the body, but then Yeshua said, but John would be the least in the kingdom of heaven. Why? Because John had not heard the gospel of the kingdom of heaven. John is operating strictly off of the Judaic code and the Mosaic law in the Old Testament. And so what was John losing? John was beheaded, right? So if we cut off the head, what are we cutting off? We're cutting off the intellect. So this is why Yeshua says that John was greatest amongst men born of woman, but least in the kingdom, because John's way of being only took him so far. The intellect can only take him so far. John was also very critical and judgmental of others, calling the Pharisees and the Sadducees, calling them vipers. So you could see the anger in John, right? He was judging without love. And love is what Yeshua is ushering in, right? And this is where you get compassion. And we're going to see the word compassion come up in the multiplying of the loaves. So John was beheaded. The intellect must be beheaded for us to achieve another level. I know a lot of you believe in the power of your minds. I believe in the power of my mind, right? But the intellect can be anti-spiritual. One of the best quotes that I heard is from Michael Beckwith. He said, we are supposed to spiritualize the intellect because the spirit is higher. We're supposed to spiritualize the intellect, but instead what we end up doing is we start intellectualizing the spirit. In fact, we're supposed to spiritualize every aspect of our lives. We're supposed to spiritualize our relationship with food. We're supposed to spiritualize our relationship with other human beings, our marriages, right? We're supposed to spiritualize our relationship to money. We're supposed to infuse spirit into everything. Similar to the kingdom of heaven verse or parable about the woman who needed some leaven into the dough, right? We are supposed to inject spirit into everything that we do, everything that we have, all the relationships that we interact with, right? And so John was limited because John, while he knew the law and he lived out the law to the best of his ability, he lacked one thing, which was love. And you're going to see this battle between the law and love all throughout the ministry of Yeshua, okay? And so verse 10, and he sent and beheaded John in the prison. Verse 11, and his head was brought in a charger and given to the damsel, and she brought it to her mother. Verse 12, and his disciples came and took up the body and buried it and went and told Jesus. Verse 13, when Jesus heard of it, he departed thence by ship into a desert place, right? Solitude, into a desert place. And when the people had heard thereof, they followed him on foot out of the cities, right? Remember, these cities represent states of consciousness. And so, in order to access God, we have to step away from groupthink and from mob mentality, from programmed, amalgamated thought into a space of solitude, into nature, in order to connect with God. So, you see Yeshua go into solitude many times, but then, of course, the people follow. Verse 14, and Jesus went forth and saw a great multitude, and he was moved with compassion towards them, and he healed their sick. You're going to hear this notion of Yeshua having compassion for them or on them or towards them all throughout. And compassion means sympathetic pity for their misfortunes. John lacked compassion, right? John, again, abided by the law, but he lacked compassion. And compassion is an offspring or a fruit, right, of love. All right. So, verse 15, and when it was evening, his disciples came to him saying, "This is a desert place, and the time is now past. Send the multitude away that they may go into the villages and buy themselves victuals." That's food or provisions. Verse 16, but Jesus said unto them, they do not they need not depart. Give ye them to eat. And we know that Yeshua talks about the difference between physical food and spiritual food. My food is to do the will of the one who sent me, right? So we have to ask ourselves, is this a literal story about a multiplying of loaves? Was Yeshua actually transmuting and multiplying and expanding matter? Or was he feeding them spiritually, so much so that they actually forgot about their physical hunger, giving them living water that made them forget about their thirst? Okay. And I've been in those kind of places where I'm learning, I'm getting fed in a way that I've never been fed before in terms of my spirit. And when you're fed in that way, especially when I fast, right, my desire for hunger actually disappears, right? My desire for hunger actually disappears. And so in verse 17, and they say unto him, we have here but 5 loaves and 2 fish. Now, if you look at the Zodiac, and religiously people will be like, oh, you talk about the Zodiac, astrology, this and that, you will see the Virgo, and she has what in her hand? She has wheat. And then 2 fish represent what sign on the Zodiac? Represents Pisces, right? So that's just something for you to consider. And later on, we're going to get into Yeshua saying, go find a man with the pitcher and then go untie the colt, right? Man with the pitcher, of all the things that he could have said, the man with the pitcher, that represents another sign of the Zodiac, right? So I've mapped it out, and I found 7 of the 12 signs of the Zodiac in the Bible. Of course, we see the ram in the story of Abraham and Isaac, right? We see these things all throughout. Okay. Verse 18, he said, bring them hither to me. Now, Yeshua is going to take us through a 10-step process of how to multiply and manifest. And what I want you to know is that what you see is not what you get. What you believe is what you get. What you actually see is not what you get. It is what you believe. That is what you ultimately get. Okay? So he said, bring them hither to me. In verse 19, and he commanded them, the multitude, to sit down on the grass. Look at all these actions. And took the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes, and looking up to heaven, he blessed and brake and gave the loaves to his disciples, and the disciples to the multitude. And they did all eat and were filled, and they took up of the fragments that remained 12 baskets full. And they that had eaten were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. And straightway Jesus constrained his disciples to get into a ship and to go before him unto the other side, which he sent the multitude away. While he sent the multitude away. So I just want to walk you through this 10-step process really quickly. First, Yeshua had compassion on them, right? He had compassion on them. There was a heart connection there. This is what John lacked, okay? Then he saw a need and said, I'm going to meet it. Remember, we said Christ-like is finding a cause that you didn't cause, right? Just accepting 100% responsibility for something that you were 100% blameless for. Okay. So he saw a need and said, I'm going to meet it. Step 3, start with what you have. Sometimes we have these ideas and we're like, I don't have all the money I need. I don't have all the resources. I don't have all the connections. No, you start with what you have. 5 loaves, 2 fish. Then you prepare those who you are about to serve. You have to be mentally ready. This is why I encourage you all to meditate. You see me come out of meditation before we step into actually doing this work together. Okay? Because I want to be in a receiving mode as well. Step 5, you elevate in consciousness. What did he do? He looked up, right? To the true source. He looked up to the true source. He wasn't looking at the scarcity. He wasn't looking in the basket and counting like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5,000. Oh my goodness. No, looked up to the true source, right? So you elevate in consciousness. That's what that actually means. Step 6, you give thanks to God in advance. Most people thank God afterwards. We have to learn to thank God in advance and afterwards. Okay. Number 7, then you distribute the solution. SOUL-UTION. You distribute the solution to those who you are seeking to serve, right? You empower others to give as well. In this case, Yeshua didn't distribute all 5,000, right? Yeshua distributed to 12, and those 12 distributed to the 5,000. This is where delegation, this is where empowerment of other people come in, right? You can't do it all on your own. Then step 9, you leave no waste behind, meaning that we're operating efficiently. We are so grateful for what we have that we actually don't waste it. And then number 10, you receive back what you gave, right? Listen to this. This is very key. They ended up full, not empty, from giving. They ended up full from giving, not empty. The law of physics says that you should be empty after you've given. What this story and this allegory is telling us is that you end up full after giving, that it comes back to you. And in fact, it came back to them immediately. Okay? So I hope that that interpretation blessed you. So verse 23, and now we're going to get into Yeshua walking on water. Verse 23, and when he had sent the multitudes away, he went up into a mountain. He always elevates in consciousness, right? Mount Ararat, Mount Moriah for Abraham, Mount Ararat for Noah, Mount Sinai for Moses, right? Mount of Olives for Yeshua. These mountains not only represent solitude, but they are elevation in consciousness, right? So he went up into a mountain apart to pray, right? And when the evening was come, he was there alone. Verse 24, but the ship was now in the midst of the sea, tossed with waves, and the wind was contrary. Okay. The wind was contrary. And verse 25, and in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went unto them, walking on the sea. Verse 26, and when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, it is a spirit, and they cried out for fear. But straightway Jesus spake unto them, saying, be of good cheer. Remember, Yeshua always says, be of good cheer, right? Be. It is I. Be not afraid. Yeshua is always speaking to our being, not our doing so much, because our natural doing will come out of our being, right? Verse 28, and Peter answered him and said, Lord, if it be thou, bid me to come unto thee on the water. And he said, come. And when Peter was come down out of the ship, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. So Peter did actually walk on water. Peter had faith. Even if it was just for a short amount of time, Peter had faith. But when he saw the wind boisterous, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried, saying, Lord, save me. So fear and faith can't reside in the same place. Fear and faith cannot reside in the same place. You can't hold on to both of those frequencies at the same time. It's either one or the other. And immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand and caught him and said unto him, O thou of little faith, wherefore didst thou doubt? And when they were come into the ship and the wind ceased, Then they that were in the ship came and worshipped him, saying, "Oh, of a truth, thou art the Son of God." And when they were gone over, they came into the land of Gennesaret, right, which means a harp in Greek, or garden of the prince, or valley of the riches in Hebrew. And when the men of that place had knowledge of him, they sent out into all that country round about, and brought unto him all that were deceased, and besought him that they might only touch the hem of his garment, similar to the woman with the issue of blood for 12 years. She just wanted to touch the hem of his garment. The clothing represents our emotional state, right? And so he just wanted to tap into that frequency. And as many as touched were made perfectly whole. Okay. So when you are operating in Christ consciousness, you are whole or holy. You see, they took off the W from holy, right? When you are whole, that means that you are actually holy, when you are complete. All right. So I want to go back to verse 25 really quickly, because it says the fourth watch. And I went back and found out what a watch means. And the first watch is 6 to 10 p.m. The second watch is when somebody stays up to observe the surroundings from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. The third watch is from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. And the fourth watch is at 6 a.m. until 10 a.m. Now, this is a story of Yeshua walking on water, right? Family, what walks on water at 6 a.m. in the morning? And then what do they call him? You are definitely the Son of God. S-O-N and S-U-N. The Son walks on water at 6 a.m. The actual Son. And Yeshua refers to himself as the Son of God, as the light of the world, right? The actual Son walks on water in the fourth watch, family. So that's something for you to consider. Okay. Is this talking about an S-O-N or an S-U-N or both? Okay. Now, walking on water also means that the water represents our subconscious mind, and our subconscious mind is deep, and it is vast, and it is dark, and it is never still, and it tosses and it turns and it's boisterous. But Yeshua, when you're operating from a level of Christ consciousness, you have now overcome the subconscious mind, and you are operating above it. In fact, you get to ride it like a buoy. A lot of people, their mind goes up and down and up and down and up and down with the journey of life. But where you truly find peace is where you just ride the waves like a buoy. You're not pushing against it, right? You're not trying to push it forward. You're not trying to get it to do something that you can't actually control. You have the stillness within you that creates calm around you, despite what's happening around you. This is the overcoming of the subconscious mind as you elevate into a level of Christ consciousness. Now, Peter represents the aspect of ourselves that says, I can do it, but loses faith when sight and outer conditions kick in. Peter represents the aspect of ourselves, or the character within ourselves, that says, I can do it. I believe I can do it. But the moment external conditions look kind of off, all of a sudden your doubt comes in. Because we have to learn to see life without the two eyes, but with our inner eye, and hold the vision, right? Yeshua held the vision that 5,000 would be fed, right? As I said before, we do not, what you see is not what you get. What you believe is what you get. And if you take your information from outside external factors as opposed to from within, then those external factors that you don't control can actually cause you to doubt what's actually possible. And again, you cannot hold faith and fear at the same time. All right. So when our fear is greater than our faith, we ultimately sink. When our fear is greater than our faith, we sink. So if you have something that's sinking in your life right now, it's probably because your fear about it, which you may think you may call it love, but it's really worry. Your fear is greater than your faith in all things working together for your good. And so this is why you find yourself sinking. Our faith can carry us. Our faith is like a buoy that can carry us. Okay. We only need saving when we are overcome by the five physical senses. This is what happened to Peter. We only need, Lord, save me. You only need saving when you are overcome by the five senses, right? Faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things unseen, right? Unseen. Yeshua does not look at external circumstances to dictate his internal state, but most of us draw from our external circumstances to determine how we actually feel within. Okay, so that concludes Matthew chapter 14. Again, we went over the beheading of John. We went over the feeding of the 5,000 and what that means. We went over what it means to actually walk on water. There's a lot of richness in this chapter, just like there was in the last one. I actually encourage you to read it again with these new insights and see if you get new divine downloads as you do that. With that, I wish you a blessed, blessed day, and I'll see you at 8 a.m.